Caracas, Venezuela, September 16th, 2025. The political landscape of Venezuela was once again thrust into the global spotlight on Tuesday as President Nicolás Maduro delivered a fiery address denouncing the United States and calling upon Venezuelans to unite in the face of what he described as an imminent threat of war in the Caribbean. His speech, delivered in Caracas before government officials, supporters, and broadcast live on Venezuelan state television, reflected both defiance and urgency amid escalating tensions with Washington. At exactly 12:05 p.m., Venezuelan state television cameras captured Maduro's arrival at the government conference hall. He entered alongside First Lady Cilia Flores, the two walking with slow but deliberate steps, exchanging brief greetings with those gathered inside. The tracking shots emphasized the symbolism, the President and First Lady side by side, projecting resilience as they prepared to address one of the most delicate geopolitical confrontations of his presidency. As Maduro made his way toward the central stage, attendees rose from their seats, applauding and nodding in solemn acknowledgement of the unfolding crisis. The images showed him extending handshakes, pausing briefly to acknowledge allies, and eventually taking his place next to Cilia Flores at the front row. Soon after, he rose again, this time not merely to greet, but to deliver a speech that would set the tone for Venezuela's position in the face of US pressure. The first part of his address was a sweeping denunciation of the United States, framed in terms of international law, sovereignty, and morality. Maduro wasted no time in setting the narrative that Venezuela was under attack, not only politically and economically, but militarily. Nicolás Maduro declared, "The United States government, in violation of all international laws, treaties, international agreements, and the United Nations Charter, has subjected our country to a multifaceted war, and particularly in the last 5 weeks, to an absolutely reprehensible, criminal, and immoral threat." His voice, measured but sharp, echoed through the hall. The audience, composed of ministers, senior officials, and military figures, responded with nods of approval and scattered applause. Maduro then repeated the statement in Spanish, underlining both his audience at home and his message intended for international ears. The remark was not made in a vacuum. Just hours earlier, US President Donald Trump had confirmed that American forces had struck at least 2 boats Washington alleged were involved in Venezuelan drug trafficking operations. The strikes, carried out in international waters of the Caribbean, had immediately escalated diplomatic tensions. Maduro, however, carefully avoided direct reference to the US military action, instead framing the episode as part of a broader campaign of aggression. Maduro then distilled his argument into stark terms. Venezuela, he claimed, was now facing the gravest of threats. He warned, "The matter at hand is a threat of war in the Caribbean against Venezuela." This statement, short and unequivocal, hung heavy in the hall. It was not framed as speculation, but as a declaration. For Maduro, the situation had surpassed mere political hostility or economic sanctions. It had entered the realm of potential armed confrontation. The president's framing aimed not only to galvanize domestic support, but also to place Venezuela's plight on the radar of international observers, particularly sympathetic governments in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. By casting the situation as a war threat, he invoked the specter of imperialism, a recurring theme in his rhetoric since assuming office. Perhaps the most forceful section of Maduro's speech was his repeated insistence on unity as the only solution. For more than a decade, Venezuela has been fractured politically, socially, and economically. But on this day, Maduro appealed directly to the country's collective identity, attempting to transcend political rivalries. He proclaimed, "And the way for us to contain the threat, neutralize it, and defeat it completely so that peace may prevail is through the unity of all sectors of Venezuela, above political, ideological, color, culture, race, and religious differences." National unity, national unity, national unity. The repetition of national unity 3 times in both Spanish and English was deliberate, serving both as a rhetorical flourish and a rallying cry. The phrase echoed across Venezuelan television broadcasts, instantly becoming the soundbite of the day. Maduro's emphasis on inclusivity across race, religion, ideology, and culture signaled his awareness of Venezuela's deep domestic divides. For years, his government has faced accusations of authoritarianism, mismanagement, and corruption, leading to severe polarization. Yet in this moment, the president sought to reposition himself not just as the head of state, but as the unifying figure confronting an external enemy. The timing of Maduro's remarks is critical. US-Venezuelan relations have been deteriorating for years, with Washington repeatedly imposing sanctions on Caracas, targeting both the oil sector and senior officials within Maduro's government. The strikes on alleged Venezuelan vessels marked a new stage in hostilities, pushing tensions into military confrontation. For the United States, the action was framed as a counter-narcotics measure aimed at dismantling what officials described as Venezuela's role in international drug trafficking networks. For Maduro, however, it was a clear violation of sovereignty and an example of American imperialism at its most aggressive. By accusing Washington of breaching the United Nations Charter, Maduro attempted to draw the conflict into the global diplomatic arena, potentially seeking support from allies such as Russia, China, and Iran. His characterization of US actions as criminal and immoral was not simply domestic rhetoric. It was a legal and moral framing intended for the international stage. The visual presentation of Maduro's speech carried symbolism as well. Seated beside First Lady Cilia Flores before rising to speak, Maduro positioned himself as both a leader and a family man, embodying stability in the face of crisis. The state-run broadcast underscored this image, showing close-ups of attendees nodding in approval and shots of Venezuelan flags prominently displayed behind the president. His language, while confrontational toward Washington, was equally aimed at Venezuelans themselves. The repeated emphasis on unity suggested that Maduro recognized the importance of consolidating internal support at a time when economic hardship, migration crises, and political fatigue have eroded confidence in his leadership. By framing the United States as the aggressor and Venezuela as the victim of an illegal war campaign, Maduro sought to rekindle nationalist sentiment, a tried and tested strategy in Venezuelan politics dating back to Hugo Chavez. As the address drew to a close, Maduro once again reiterated his call for unity, ensuring that his central message would linger long after the cameras stopped rolling. The president had effectively positioned Venezuela at the center of an unfolding geopolitical crisis, casting his government as both defender of national sovereignty and victim of imperial aggression. The stakes, as outlined in his own words, were nothing less than existential. In the space of less than 20 minutes, Nicolás Maduro had elevated Venezuela's confrontation with the United States into a matter of survival, not merely political survival for his administration, but survival for the nation as a whole. His remarks, broadcast across Venezuela and rapidly picked up by international news agencies, underscored the seriousness with which his government views the escalating conflict. The world now watches closely. Will Maduro's appeals to unity strengthen his domestic grip and rally Venezuelans behind him? Or will the confrontation with Washington only deepen Venezuela's isolation and vulnerability on the world stage? For now, what remains undeniable is the urgency of his message and the starkness of his warning. As Maduro himself declared, the crisis has moved beyond politics or ideology. The matter at hand is a threat of war in the Caribbean against Venezuela. And for that, in his view, only one response remains possible: national unity, national unity, national unity.